around $120 an hour. The man will cook, cuddle, and sleep next to his customer. Think of this like a partner without the hassle. There are short-term packages as well as overnight packages which include added extras, if you know what I mean, wink wink, and can cost over $1,000 for a night.
Nice, good choice, good choice, good choice.
I heard him say like they both like each other, but they don't know that they like each other.
Okay.
先輩お疲れ様です。
お疲れ。
お疲れ様です。先輩何してるんですか？
まだちょっと。
The next experience is the Japanese Boys Love Cafe. This is where things get a little more, let's say, unique. But picture a cafe with the theme of a school. Now you as a customer would go in and you would have the role of a student. The concept is that the workers take the role of other students who are in love with each other. There is no intimacy per se, but a lot of suggestive interactions are going on, such as both workers having a little nibble of a cookie or something similar. Most of the customers are women and find this very attractive. Are you still with me? Okay, good. Moving on to the host clubs. These are by far the most talked about entertainment for women who are looking for a good time. Host clubs are men who cater to the needs of Japanese women. Normally, this revolves around talking to the customer, pouring drinks, and having a good time. Legally, workers and customers are not allowed to conduct sexual activity in the establishment. However, swapping contact details and going to a nearby love hotel can happen. There are even foreigners who try their hand at working at a host club. It must be said that in general, Japan is not the most foreign-friendly country. Some host bars won't allow foreigners to enter and most definitely won't allow foreigners to work in the bar, but there are some that do. As you can imagine, it's sadly not all sunshine and roses. The hosts often must drink every day, which can soon take a toll. Some hosts have reported forcing themselves to be sick in order to avoid damage from the booze. Nevertheless, the demand is high. An interviewer spoke to one of the highest paid Japanese hosts who made over $200,000 a night. You may be wondering why this happens and why it's so popular in certain parts of Japan. From watching plenty of interviews, hosts often say that their job is to be more masculine than the average man. But remember, life in Japan is very different. And so masculinity is interpreted differently, and not how we often see it in the Western world. So does this mean that all the women of Japan are nymphomaniacs? Not quite. The reason why some women pay crazy amounts of money for these services is that their desire is much deeper than pure physical intimacy. Naturally, there are those women who desire the connection on a deeper level, while others prefer the more straightforward services.
外行き経験、中行き経験、潮行き経験、農行き経験、この4つの中で、そのなんか経験したことありますか？
いいです。外行きいいです。中行きもいいです。潮吹きはノー。農行きはイエス。
To be honest, I can see why some of these services are popular. Let's take Tomoka. She is a Japanese woman living and working in Tokyo. She is single, career-driven, but finds she needs an emotional release from life. So, she uses services like this to help her through. Women in Japan often face their own dating challenges, and so services like this become an attractive option. I know this may sound surprising, but I truly believe that Japan is ahead of its time and essentially leading the rest of the world. I'm not making a value judgment here. Whether this is good or bad is subjective, but I foresee such services becoming more prevalent globally in the future. Although these services may seem unusual to some, the dating scene is undoubtedly changing. In the Western world, the average man and woman are subjected to immense pressure. The system we're in compels us to prioritize aspects of life that, in the grand scheme of things, aren't critically important. We're obliged to place money, career, and business at the forefront to ensure our survival, while other important emotional needs are put on the back burner. But if your passions lie in business, money, or work, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Nonetheless, a lack of balance often leads to emotional voids. So, with this thought in mind, I believe that services like these, which offer a novel form of connection and intimacy, will become much more common in the future as many people struggle to find balance. But what do you think about all of this? Oh, and by the way, check out this video we published recently. I think you will be surprised what we found out. But nevertheless, thank you so much for sticking around till the end. Stay strong, and I'll speak to you in the next one.
When Rihanna sang "We Found Love in a Hopeless Place," she wasn't singing about jail, but these raunchy female officers didn't let that stop them.
Sexual misconduct involving an inmate.
13 female corrections officers.
From shocking recordings
and you got a lot of head games
to helping inmates break free.
She helped 2 convicted killers escape from a maximum security prison.
Here are 5 female officers who are down bad and can't keep their filthy hands off inmates. Disclaimer. Meet Kawana Jenkins. This corrections officer let an inmate make a video while she was doing the most shocking thing imaginable. Kawana faced 11 charges, including 5 counts of violating an oath by a public officer and 1 count of giving an inmate a prohibited item. In the early hours of January 28, 2023, correction officers with the Fulton County Jail conducted a shakedown on the maximum security wing. They seized over a dozen weapons, contraband, and 11 phones. As officers looked through the phones, they stumbled on a video of one of their own, 36-year-old Kawana Jenkins with inmate Jamal Ward. 20-year-old Jamal was awaiting trial for a 2022 murder and facing 6 other charges. In another video, Kawana was seated in a chair and filmed by an unidentified inmate. His index finger disappeared into her mouth as she simulated, well, you know what. Kawana was promptly fired and placed under arrest. The only person close to her level of nastiness is Joyce Mitchell, and you'll see what I mean soon. Number 2, Joyce Mitchell. She was leaving her husband and son to drive off to Mexico with an inmate. Joyce was charged with promoting prison contraband in the 1st degree and criminal facilitation in the 4th degree. On Saturday, June 6, 2015, correction officers in the impenetrable Clinton Correctional Facility, Dannemora, New York, noticed 2 inmates, Richard Matt and David Sweat, didn't answer during the 5:30 a.m. head count. When officers checked them, they found pieces of clothing arranged under their sheets. All that they found was a cute note the men left behind. The men had cut holes in the steel walls of their cells with power tools and climbed through pipes and tunnels until they reached a broken open utility hole cover a block away, just like in the classic movie The Shawshank Redemption. The prison hadn't had an escape in 100 years, and these were dangerous men. Richard was serving 25 years to life for the 1997 kidnapping and murder of a 76-year-old businessman. The man had fired Richard. Richard retaliated by killing and dismembering him. David was no better. At 16, he'd already been charged twice for attempted second-degree burglary. In 2002, he upped the stakes when he shot a sheriff's deputy 15 times and ran over his body. That got him a life sentence, and he'd been behind bars since. Both men were added to the U.S. Marshal's most wanted list. Hundreds of state and local law enforcement officers worked around the clock to get both killers back before they hurt anybody else. 3 weeks later, the manhunt ended with Richard dead.
Tactical team from Customs and Border Protection met up with Matt in the woods, challenged him, and he was shot dead.
David was captured in a hideout just a mile from the Canadian border. By then, the authorities had answered the one question on everybody's mind.
We want to find out exactly what happened. And one of the big questions is, where did the tools come from?
The day the men had made their great escape, Joyce Mitchell, an instructor in the prison's tailor shop, had checked herself into the hospital with a case of nerves. A week later, the police knew she had much to be nervous about. The 51-year-old had been very busy behind bars. She had eyes on David. She would buy him homemade food and contraband. After her shift, the two would disappear into a sewing shop storage closet for at least a half hour. Surprisingly, David wasn't the only one she was carrying on with. Joyce had a relationship with Richard Matt, sending him risque notes and nude pictures. In time, she convinced prison officials to move David to the cell next to Richard. Before the escape, Joyce snuck in some tools for the men: hacksaw blades, 2 chisels, and a punch. The 51-year-old also planned to meet them at midnight and run away together to Mexico. The officers confronted Joyce with what they knew. Her husband, who also worked at the prison, took to the news supporting his wife.
I just couldn't believe it. Her reaction when she said they really escaped, and that's the way I left it at that. And
You've known her for 21 years. You looked in her eyes. Nothing seemed unusual about her expression or her demeanor?
And when I said they want to talk to us, it's because we know them, we're to help out.
Later on, she changed her story.
You know, people need to know that I was only trying to save my family.
Joyce claimed the men had threatened to kill her husband if she didn't help, but the police already knew she was lying. Joyce pleaded guilty. If this seems like the dumbest officer ever, trust me, it gets worse. Her replacement was stupid enough to fall for the exact same trick. Number 3, Denise Prell. If the inmates at Clinton Correctional Facility thought Cupid was done with them, they were in for a big surprise. Denise was facing 25 charges, including promoting prison contraband, abuse in the 3rd degree, and 23 counts of official misconduct. In September 2015, just 3 months after Joyce Mitchell helped convicted murderers Richard Matt and David Sweat break out of the maximum security state prison, 39-year-old Denise Prell was hired to replace Joyce as the new training supervisor. Joyce was already serving a 7-year sentence behind bars, and the prison hoped the notoriety she brought to the facility was behind them, but they were wrong. In September 2017, the prison was in the news with yet another love affair in the tailor shop. The prison authorities had discovered Denise was having a relationship with a former inmate, Paul Norris. Paul was serving a 20-year sentence for first-degree manslaughter. He'd been transferred to the prison in May. When they questioned the mother of 2, Denise Prell, she admitted everything. Like Joyce, the two met at the tailor shop, and sparks had flown. By the following month, they were writing letters and cards to each other using the moniker Gwen Freeman. Gwendolyn was Denise's middle name, and Freeman, well, you can guess why they came up with that.
Call him by the name Gwen Freeman. He says she called him that because her middle name was Gwendolyn, and Freeman was in reference to him someday becoming a free man.
Denise even got him a prepaid phone and P.O. box to talk with him when she was off work. Every other week, she gave him cash and even settled a debt he had with another inmate. When Paul was transferred to Elmira Correctional Facility, Denise had visited him, and the two had held hands and kissed. The lovebirds planned to reunite when Paul was freed in 20 years. Denise was soon relieved of her job. A week later, she was behind bars in the same prison she worked in, awaiting to be arraigned. Denise pled not guilty to all the charges against her and turned down plea deals, choosing to go to court. Fast forward to a year later, a visibly nervous Denise was in a Clinton County courtroom, tearfully pleading guilty to all charges.
Ms. Prell, your criminality in this matter, which you've pled guilty to, is difficult, if not nearly impossible, to understand in light of what this community went.
By then, Denise and her husband had divorced, and he had custody of the kids. Denise claimed the affair didn't ruin her marriage, but she's not holding a torch for Paul either. But this next officer just ran out of luck, and her secret affair is about to be exposed in the most humiliating way imaginable. This is Charlene O'Banion. When she got to work that morning, she had no idea the entire prison knew the nasty things that she'd gotten up to. Charlene was charged with improper activity with a person person in custody. Correction officers at the Conroe Montgomery County Jail facility in Texas received a tip that a female correction officer, 33-year-old Charlene O'Banion, had been intimate with an inmate in custody. After secretly recording her phone calls, detectives discovered that the object of her affection was 28-year-old Jacob Parker. Jacob was behind bars for possession of a firearm and resisting arrest. He also had an open warrant for theft. On December 17, 2021, the detectives confronted Charlene about her relationship with Jacob.
We were notified of a possible improper relationship between you and Jacob Parker. So we're here for that. I just kind of wanted to talk to you about it and get your side of that story.
Don't know anything about it. I mean,
Do you know who I'm talking about?
he's in Pod 6.
Okay.
Charlene appeared shocked. The detective asked if she'd talked to him on any calls. Again, Charlene vehemently denied it.
Have you talked to him on any jail phone calls or anything like that? Not at all? Okay.
Reach more shoppers. From URL to IRL. See how PayPal can help you grow.
Welcome to the Fun Facts of Mythology channel. Black peoples, one of the largest ethnic groups in the world, have a rich history that is documented even in the Holy Scriptures. Surprisingly, the Bible talks about the origins of the African people, including their melanin kings and queens. In this video, you will discover fun facts about the biblical ancestors of Black and African peoples. Please leave your like, comments and subscribe to the channel. According to the Holy Scriptures, all current peoples are descendants of Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Cam, and Japheth. This also applies to Black people and other ethnic groups with dark skin, whose Hamite lineage originates from Ham, one of Noah's sons. Ham is the brother of Shem and Japheth, who respectively represent the Semitic peoples, Arabs, Jews, Syrians, etc., and the Petites, Europeans and Asians. The term Hamites, or Amid, originally referred to people descended from Khan or Rami, one of Noah's sons, according to the Bible. According to the book of Genesis, after the flood, Noah and his 3 sons were charged with continuing the lineage of Adam and his father's descent. With just 8 people, Noah, his wife, their 3 sons and their 3 daughters-in-law, humanity needed to start over. Ham, son of Noah, is recognized as the ancestor of African and Black peoples. In the Bible, his name is always associated with Africa and, in fact, the Book of Psalms places him as the ancestor of the ancient Egyptians. It is interesting to note that in antiquity, rabbinical traditions, ancient tales of the Jewish people and other ancient traditions always identified Ham as the ancestor of African peoples. Furthermore, all interpretations of Ham's children point to African countries and regions of Africa and African peoples. It is curious that the name Ham itself, in Hebrew, Aramaic and other ancient languages, means burned or dark, in reference to the skin tone of his descendants. In chapter 10 of the book of Genesis, between verses 6 and 14, it is possible to obtain more information about the lineage of Ham, also known as the Hamite peoples. The text presents Ham's descendants, Cush, father of several African peoples, and Mizraim, father of the ancient Egyptians. It is important to mention that Arabs, Jews, Syrians, and other peoples refer to Egypt as Mitraim, in reference to its originator. Other sons of Ham are Put, also known as Phut, and Canaan, who is the father of the Canaanites, not the Africans. It is essential to understand that Canaan represents a distinct region and people. The sons of Cush include Havilah, Sabta, Sabteka, Rama, Sheba, and Nimrod. At the beginning of his reign, Babel, among other cities, were part of his domain. Nimrod, who was an ancestor of the native peoples of ancient Babylon, the Sumerians, order him to leave that land, as they believe that African lands are reserved for the descendants of Ham. However, Canaan disobeys and continues to dwell in that land, completely ignoring the will of his father and his brothers.
In a land synonymous with cowboys, outlaws, and gold rushes, the American Wild West harbors tales as varied as they are enigmatic. This video unveils 10 unusual events that took place in this iconic era. From legendary figures like Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp to bizarre incidents like cannibalism and poetic outlaws, each account provides a unique lens through which we can revisit and understand the complexities and quirks of the Old West. Number 1. The Legend of Big Nose George. The Legend of Big Nose George is a story that treads the thin line between the macabre and the unbelievable, aptly capturing the bizarre character of the American Wild West. George Parrott, more commonly known as Big Nose George, was an outlaw who met a grisly end. But it's what happened after his death that makes this tale exceptionally strange. Known for train robberies and a litany of other crimes, George was eventually captured in 1880 after a botched train robbery in which 2 lawmen were killed. He was tried, found guilty, and sentenced to hang in Rawlins, Wyoming. As he awaited his fate in a makeshift prison, George attempted a failed escape, further sealing his fate in the eyes of the law. Yet, his hanging was anything but ordinary. The first attempt to execute him failed when the rope broke, sending him plummeting to the ground. George, now injured but still alive, had to endure a second attempt, which was, tragically for him, successful. One would think this would be the end of Big Nose George's story, but it was only the beginning. After his death, George's body was not claimed by any relatives. He was, after all, an outlaw without any family who cared to acknowledge him. This lack of claim to his corpse opened the door for what can only be described as one of the most unusual post-mortem treatments in history. Dr. John Osborne and Dr. Thomas Maggie decided to use George's body for medical research. The doctors removed the top of his skull to study the brain, searching for anomalies that could explain his criminal behavior. However, they found nothing out of the ordinary. Osborne went a step further, fashioning a death mask of George's face and then using his skin to create a pair of shoes and a medical bag. Yes, you read that right. Dr. Osborne literally walked in Big Nose George's shoes for several years, even allegedly wearing them at his inaugural ball when he was elected as the first Democratic governor of Wyoming. The shoes, the death mask, and even fragments of George's skull are still on display at the Carbon County Museum in Rawlins, Wyoming. What's even more astonishing is that Dr. Osborne's medical career was far from hurt by these morbid activities. He continued to be a respected member of his community, and was later part of the team that founded the Wyoming State Hospital, where he applied his medical skills, presumably more ethically. The legend of Big Nose George stands as an enduring testament to the strangeness and the brutal pragmatism that pervaded the atmosphere of the American Wild West. Here, in a land where life was cheap and the law was often an afterthought, even an outlaw's death could serve the living in ways that stretch the boundaries of modern ethical understanding. Number 2. The poker game shootout between Doc Holliday and Ed Bailey. The poker game shootout involving Doc Holliday and Ed Bailey is a tale that epitomizes the tension, bravado, and lawlessness of the American Wild West. John Henry Doc Holliday, a dentist by training but gambler and gunman by reputation, was a figure larger than life. His involvement in this shootout is one that adds layers of complexity to his already enigmatic persona. This particular incident took place in Fort Griffin, Texas, in 1878, and like many confrontations of its time, it was ignited by ego and resolved by gunfire. The game was high-stakes poker, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. Ed Bailey, a local ruffian who had taken a dislike to Holliday, was playing loosely, perhaps trying to throw Doc off his game. Throughout the game, Bailey had a habit of peeking at his cards under the table, a serious breach of etiquette, and a move considered cheating by the standards of honest poker. Holliday warned Bailey multiple times to play the game straight, but Bailey continued his sly tactics. Finally, Doc had had enough. On what would be the final hand, Bailey again peeked at his cards. Doc took this as an affront not just to the game's rules, but also as a personal insult. Instead of calling Bailey out, he simply declared the pot his own, citing Bailey's cheating as a forfeiture. In a flash, Bailey drew his knife, intending perhaps to intimidate Holliday or escalate the disagreement into a full-blown fight. Doc Holliday, not a man to be outdone or intimidated, responded in kind but more decisively. He pulled his revolver and shot Bailey dead right there at the poker table. What followed was a legal ordeal where Doc was arrested for murder but ultimately not charged, thanks in part to the fact that Bailey had brandished a weapon first, and also because Holliday was well acquainted with Wyatt Earp, who wielded significant influence. But perhaps more than anything, this incident cemented Holliday's reputation as a man not to be trifled with, a deadly gunslinger who could switch from gambling to gunplay in the blink of an eye. However, the incident had other, far-reaching implications. Doc Holliday left Texas shortly after the event, making his way to Dodge City where he would meet Wyatt Earp and eventually partake in the famous gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona. This act of violence over a card game was, in some ways, a preview of the deadly path that Holliday was destined to walk, a path that would make him one of the most notorious figures of the American Wild West. The tale of the poker game shootout stands as an emblematic story of an era where disputes were often settled with bullets rather than words, and where men like Doc Holliday became legends, their reputations crafted just as much from their skill with cards and camaraderie as from their deadly accuracy with a gun. Number 3, the emigrant train cannibalism at Donner Pass. The story of the emigrant train cannibalism at Donner Pass is one of the most harrowing tales of survival and despair that emerged from the American Wild West. It is a grim narrative that unfolded during the winter of 1846 to 1847, when a group of pioneers led by George Donner and James F. Reed found themselves trapped in the Sierra Nevada mountains. The Donner Party, as they came to be known, had embarked on what they thought would be a transformative journey to California. But their expedition took a disastrous turn due to a series of bad decisions, delays, and the unforgiving hand of Mother Nature. The group initially tried to take a new and untested route, known as the Hastings Cutoff, which promised to shorten their journey. However, the route was filled with obstacles like dense forests and large, impassable bodies of water, slowing them down considerably. By the time the pioneers reached the Sierra Nevada, they were low on supplies and morale. Then, heavy snowfalls barricaded them in, rendering their wagons useless and forcing them to set up makeshift camps. As the weeks turned into months, the situation grew increasingly dire. Food supplies ran out, and hunting became nearly impossible in the deep snow. People began to die of malnutrition, exposure, and other ailments. It was under these desperate conditions that members of the party resorted to cannibalism, consuming the bodies of those who had already perished in order to survive. This grim decision wasn't taken lightly, and it haunted the survivors for the rest of their lives. Rescue attempts were made, but they came too late for many. The first rescue party reached the stranded pioneers in February of 1847, but by that time, the group had been reduced to around half of its original size of 87 members. Those who were rescued were in terrible physical condition, and many were mentally scarred by the ordeal. Remarkably, some of the Donner Party survivors went on to lead relatively normal lives in California, but the shadow of what had occurred at Donner Pass lingered forever. The saga of the Donner Party serves as a grim reminder of the limits of human endurance and the dark choices people are forced to make when confronted with unimaginable hardships. It also illustrates the perilous nature of westward migration during that era, where the promise of new beginnings and fertile lands could turn into a nightmarish struggle for survival at the drop of a hat. The very name Donner Pass has become synonymous with tragedy and cannibalism, and the story itself has been dissected from various angles, psychological, sociological, and historical, to understand how a group of hopeful pioneers came to such a catastrophic end. In the annals of American history, the tale of the Donner Party occupies a space that is both tragic and cautionary, serving as an enduring example of how the pursuit of a dream can sometimes lead to unimaginable horror. Number 4, the Sand Creek Massacre. The Sand Creek Massacre stands as one of the darkest episodes in the narrative of the American Wild West, a poignant illustration of the tensions and brutalities that marked the frontier period. It occurred on November 29, 1864, near the Sand Creek in the Colorado Territory, and was perpetrated by U.S. Army soldiers led by Colonel John M. Chivington. Contrary to the romanticized notions of noble cowboys and fearless lawmen, this event starkly highlights the atrocities committed against Native Americans. Chivington and his men targeted a peaceful settlement of Cheyenne and Arapaho people, who were under the impression that they were under the protection of the U.S. government. Chief Black Kettle, one of the Cheyenne leaders, had even raised both an American flag and a white flag of surrender above his lodge to signify their peaceful intent. Despite this, Chivington's men attacked the village at dawn, slaughtering an estimated 150 to 200 Native Americans, the majority of whom were women, children, and the elderly. For the Cheyenne and Arapaho people, the massacre was a cultural and communal catastrophe from which recovery was long and painful. It severed any faith in peaceful negotiations and cemented the belief that the U.S. government could not be trusted. The tragedy also motivated other Native American tribes to form alliances and resist further military and civilian encroachments into their lands. As one of the most horrific instances of military violence against Native Americans, the Sand Creek Massacre serves as a grim monument to the sufferings of indigenous peoples during the westward expansion. It challenges the idealized version of the Old West, forcing a more critical examination of a period often romanticized in American folklore. This brutal episode casts a long and disquieting shadow, a haunting reminder of the human cost paid for the settlement of the American frontier. Number 5, California Gold Rush Ghost Ships. The California Gold Rush. Ghost ships form an eerie yet fascinating chapter in the complex narrative of the American Wild West. While the gold rush is often associated with bustling mining towns and prospectors eager to stake their claim, it also left behind a more haunting legacy in the form of abandoned ships in the San Francisco Bay. When gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill in 1848, it set off a mad dash to the West Coast. Thousands of would-be miners and entrepreneurs set sail for California, inflating the population of San Francisco almost overnight. These hopeful individuals arrived in droves aboard various ships from around the world. However, upon reaching the Golden Gate, many were so gripped by gold fever that they disembarked hastily, often leaving ships virtually unmanned. Captains and crews alike deserted their maritime duties to seek their fortunes in the gold fields of California. Consequently, many of these vessels were left to float aimlessly in the bay or were anchored and subsequently forgotten. Over time, they turned into decaying hulks, serving as ghostly reminders of the frenzied quest for wealth that defined the era. The phenomenon of the gold rush ghost ships serves as a compelling metaphor for the transient and often reckless nature of frontier life. They are monuments to both the ambition and folly that shaped the American West, physical embodiments of the dreams and desperations of a transformative era. While the gold rush is celebrated for the fortunes it made and the westward expansion it fueled, the ghost ships stand as solemn testimony to the impulsiveness and neglect that were also part of this historic scramble for wealth. Like drifting spirits of a past age, the California Gold Rush ghost ships echo the complexities, the ambitions, and the unchecked fervor of a period that was anything but simple. They are the maritime phantoms of an era gone by, haunting the waters and the history of the American West. Number 6, Wyatt Earp and the gunfight at the OK Corral. The name Wyatt Earp has become synonymous with the lawmen of the American Wild West, and the gunfight at the OK Corral stands as one of the most iconic episodes in the lore of this era. It took place on October 26, 1881, in the boomtown of Tombstone, Arizona, and has since been immortalized in books, movies, and even ballads. Yet the real events were both more complex and less glamorous than the legends suggest. The shootout had immediate and long-lasting repercussions. Virgil Earp was maimed in an ambush a few months later, and Morgan Earp was murdered, further fueling the cycle of violence. Wyatt Earp, now more vengeful than lawful, formed a posse and went on what came to be known as the Earp Vendetta Ride, hunting down those he held responsible for his brother's fates. Legal aftermath also ensued, with the Earps and Holliday initially arrested for murder. However, they were later exonerated, partly due to the biased testimony and the murky circumstances surrounding the gunfight. The event polarized public opinion, both locally and nationally, and questions surrounding the Earps and Holliday's actions lingered for decades. The gunfight at the OK Corral serves as a lens through which the complexities of the Wild West come into sharp focus. It was not just a duel between good and evil, but a chaotic blend of law and lawlessness, of personal vendettas and public duties. It demonstrated how justice, in the absence of strong institutions, could easily devolve into a brutal, bloody spectacle. More than just a tale of gunslingers and outlaws, the episode speaks to the volatile mix of ambition, desperation, and flawed humanity that characterized the American frontier. Number 7. The Great Northfield, Minnesota Raid. The Great Northfield, Minnesota Raid holds a unique place in the lore of the American Wild West, not least because it took place far from the iconic desert landscapes usually associated with such tales. Occurring on September 7, 1876, this raid was a brazen daytime robbery attempt on the First National Bank of Northfield, Minnesota. The perpetrators were none other than the infamous James Younger gang, led by Jesse James and his brother Frank, along with Cole Younger and his brothers. Having committed various robberies across the Midwest, the gang aimed to plunder the bank's coffers, but the events unfolded in a way that caught everyone by surprise and signaled the beginning of the end for the notorious outlaws. The gang had hoped for a quick and smooth operation, but the residents of Northfield proved extraordinarily resistant. When gang member Frank James announced the robbery inside the bank, Joseph Lee Haywood, the acting cashier, courageously refused to open the safe. Despite being assaulted and eventually killed for his defiance, Haywood's resistance bought valuable time. Meanwhile, outside the bank, Northfield citizens quickly realized what was happening. Armed with whatever weapons they could find, they took to the streets and began firing at the gang members who were guarding the bank's entrance. The Great Northfield, Minnesota Raid serves as an enduring testament to the unpredictability of life on the American frontier. It reveals the complexities and nuances of a time and place often oversimplified in popular culture. Here, the outlaws are not glorified anti-heroes, nor are the citizens passive victims. Instead, the event portrays a community capable of remarkable solidarity and courage in the face of danger. It also underscores the perils and uncertainties that even the most notorious outlaws faced, challenging the myth of the all-powerful, untouchable gunslinger. The raid, its spectacular failure, and the subsequent fallout serve as a microcosm of the larger struggles between law and lawlessness, community and individualism, myth and reality, in the turbulent tapestry of the American Wild West. Number 8. The Harrowing Tale of Stagecoach Mary. The Harrowing Tale of Stagecoach Mary, or Mary Fields as she was originally named, introduces a character into the Wild West narrative who defies the usual stereotypes. Born a slave in Tennessee around 1832, Fields was emancipated after the Civil War and ventured into the American frontier, eventually settling in Cascade, Montana. Unlike the damsels in distress or saloon girls commonly portrayed in Wild West lore, Stagecoach Mary was a 6-foot-tall, 200-pound black woman who was as rugged and fearless as any man of her time. Her nickname came from her tenure as a star route mail carrier, a job she took on at the age of 60, making her the first African-American woman to serve in that role. Her relationship with the townspeople was complex. On one hand, her saloon brawls and confrontations with the law sometimes made her a controversial figure. On the other hand, she was a beloved local celebrity by the time of her death. When Montana passed a law that forbade women from entering saloons, the mayor of Cascade granted her an exemption, an honor not accorded to any other woman. Stagecoach Mary's story is a compelling testament to the complexities and contradictions of the American Wild West. She was an outsider in many ways, a black female stagecoach driver in a world that often sought to exclude her based on race and gender. Yet, she carved a niche for herself through her sheer tenacity, courage, and competence. She challenged societal norms and left an indelible impact on the communities she served and the larger narrative of the American frontier. As both an African American and a woman, Her story adds layers of complexity to the traditional Wild West tableau, highlighting the diverse array of characters who shaped this seminal period in American history. Number 9, Billy the Kid's Jailbreak. Billy the Kid's Jailbreak is one of the most celebrated episodes in the legend of this infamous outlaw. Born Henry McCarty, but known by several aliases, including William H. Bonney, Billy the Kid was a gunman, rustler, and key figure in the Lincoln County War, a violent feud between rival factions vying for control of dry goods and cattle interests in New Mexico. By the age of 21, he had allegedly killed 8 men, though this figure is often debated. His legend is a mix of fact and fiction, and the jailbreak of April 28, 1881, epitomizes the audacious and slippery nature of this iconic figure. At this point in his short but eventful life, Billy had been captured by Sheriff Pat Garrett and was awaiting execution for the murder of Sheriff William J. Brady during the Lincoln County War. He was being held in a 2-story adobe building in Lincoln, New Mexico. The ground floor served as the residence for the jailer, James Bell, and his family, while the second floor housed the jail and courtroom. Billy was confined to the second floor, shackled hand and foot. Billy the Kid's jailbreak showcased his cunning, resourcefulness, and audacity. It also cemented his status as a legendary figure of the Wild West. However, his freedom was short-lived. Less than 3 months later, on July 14, 1881, he was tracked down by Pat Garrett in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, and was shot and killed. The story of Billy the Kid's jailbreak, like many aspects of his life, blurs the lines between fact and fiction, history and myth. It encapsulates the themes of rebellion, resilience, and ultimately, the tragic end that befell many outlaws of the American frontier. Number 10, Black Bart, the Poet Outlaw. Black Bart, the Poet Outlaw, provides a different kind of narrative in the tapestry of the Wild West, combining the audacity of a highwayman with the sensitivity of a poet. Born Charles Earl Bowles, Black Bart was an English-born American outlaw known for his polite manners, gentlemanly conduct, and especially for leaving poetic messages at the scenes of his crimes. Operating primarily in Northern California and Oregon, he committed his robberies almost exclusively on Wells Fargo stagecoaches between 1875 and 1883. Black Bart's modus operandi stood in stark contrast to the brazen violence often associated with outlaws of his time. He was never known to have fired a shot, nor did he ever rob the passengers of the stagecoaches he targeted. His interest was solely in the Wells Fargo safes. Dressed in a sackcloth mask and a long linen duster, armed only with a shotgun, he would halt the stagecoach with a simple but firm command and proceed to rob the Wells Fargo box. His calm and composed demeanor often left a lasting impression on his victims, some of whom later described him as a gentleman bandit. After his release, Black Bart disappeared from public records and his ultimate fate remains a mystery. Some say he continued his life under a new identity, while others speculate that he went back to England. Regardless of his ultimate fate, the tale of Black Bart embodies a confluence of contrasts, a genteel demeanor with a life of crime, and a ruthless efficiency paired with poetic sentimentality. In many ways, the story of Black Bart challenges the conventional imagery of the Wild West outlaw. It adds dimensions of complexity and humanity, painting a portrait of a criminal who, in his own unique way, reflected the contradictions and ambiguities of the American frontier. This multifaceted character thus remains one of the most captivating figures in the annals of Wild West history.
The world is full of people of all different shapes and sizes, and that is what makes life so interesting. Being skinny isn't everything, but for some people it's their way of life. Join us as we take a look at the people who have taken their quest for thinness way too far, as well as the people who just can't help being naturally thin. From supermodels with rare health conditions to people who have taken plastic surgery way too far.
Can you breathe?
These are the 20 thinnest people you won't believe exist. Lizzie Velasquez. Meet Lizzie Velasquez. Lizzie was actually labeled as the ugliest woman in the world due to a rare condition she was born with. This condition affected her muscle and body fat development, making her appearance different from what people considered normal. It was a tough road for her, but despite the initial concerns from doctors, Lizzie surprised everyone by developing normally in terms of her brain, internal organs, and bones. However, at the age of 4, she experienced blindness in her right eye, adding another challenge to her journey. Throughout her life, Lizzie faced relentless bullying and had to endure the overwhelming pain of being called the ugliest woman alive. But you know what? Lizzie didn't let that define her. With the support of her amazing parents, she found the strength to move past the negativity and focus on something positive. Lizzie dedicated her life to speaking out against cyberbullying and negative body image. She became a true inspiration, spreading her message of true beauty far and wide. In fact, she gave a popular TED Talk that resonated with people all over the world. Her words were so powerful that she quickly became an internationally sought-after motivational speaker. But Lizzie didn't stop there. She channeled her experiences and insights into writing 3 incredible books that have inspired countless individuals. And that's not all. Her story even inspired a film called The Lizzie Project. What an inspiration! Go Lizzie! Tom Staniford. This is the incredible story of Tom and his journey with MDP syndrome, an incredibly rare and complex condition. After extensive research, scientists were finally able to track down the genetic origins of this syndrome, which only affects a total of 8 people in the entire world. Yep, just 8 people have MDP. Tom's condition has some significant challenges. Due to MDP syndrome, he lacks natural cushioning on his body, experiences constant discomfort in his feet, and faces a higher risk of bone fractures from falls. As if that wasn't enough, his disorder has led to abnormally high levels of fat.
Don't forget to vacate the contents of the safe too. ¿De dónde eres, hombre? Oh, God. I got one here on the comms. They're coming for you. Oh, amigos! Necesitamos ayuda! Come here, amigos! Go back inside your pad and lock the doors. Hey, get up! You know where to go, homie. Establish a